"Sir, I'm sorry, but that flight is cancelled." Those 8 words landed harder than Daniel Hayes expected. He stood frozen at gate C-19, one hand gripping a small black carry-on, the other holding his 7-year-old son's jacket. His 11-year-old daughter stood close beside him, reading his face before she even understood the words. Behind him, people sighed, complained, and pulled out their phones. Around him, wheels rolled over the terminal floor. Overhead announcements echoed, and somewhere nearby a baby cried. But for Daniel, the whole airport went silent. In his coat pocket was a folded funeral program. His mother's name was printed across the top. Ruth Hayes, beloved mother, grandmother, friend. Her funeral was the next morning in Seattle, and now, somehow, he was stuck in Chicago with 2 children, a cancelled flight, and a promise he had made to a woman who had never once broken a promise to him. Daniel swallowed hard. Cancelled? What do you mean cancelled? Is there another flight tonight? The gate agent barely looked up from her screen. The aircraft was pulled for maintenance, and all remaining seats on later flights are full. Any connection? Another airline. Standby. She kept typing. Nothing that gets you there before tomorrow night. Tomorrow night the funeral would be over by then. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. Because he had learned, over the past 3 years, that if you allowed yourself 2 or 3 seconds, grief could rush in and knock the breath out of you. His daughter Lucy touched his sleeve. Dad, he opened his eyes and forced his face to soften. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm checking, but it wasn't okay." Daniel Hayes was 38 years old. 3 years earlier, his wife Emily had died suddenly after a winter highway accident. 1 minute she had been driving home from a school fundraiser. The next minute, Daniel's entire world had split into a before and an after. Since then, life had become a long chain of responsibilities. Lunches to pack, homework to check, soccer uniforms to wash at midnight, parent-teacher meetings, nightmares, fever checks, rent, groceries, broken appliances, bedtime tears, sometimes the children's, sometimes his own after their bedroom doors closed. He had learned how to braid Lucy's hair by watching videos at 2 in the morning. He had learned how to calm Ben during asthma attacks. He had learned how to smile when he was exhausted and how to keep moving when his heart felt empty. And through all of it, one person had stood behind him like a wall that would never fall. His mother. Ruth Hayes had not simply helped raise the children after Emily died. She had helped save Daniel. She came over with soup and laundry baskets. She sat beside Lucy when the little girl stopped speaking for almost 2 weeks. She slept in a recliner near Ben's bed during his worst chest infection. She reminded Daniel to eat, reminded him to shower, reminded him that grief was not failure. Most of all, she reminded him that his children did not need a perfect father. They needed him. When Ruth had a stroke 6 days earlier, Daniel flew to Seattle alone for 1 day, then rushed back home because Lucy had final exams and Ben had a school concert he could not miss. His mother had been unconscious by then, but Daniel still held her hand and whispered, "I'll be back, Mum, I promise." She died the next morning. Now, here he was, trying not to break that promise. Ben tugged his hand. "Dad, are we not going to Grandma's?" Daniel bent down. "I'm trying, buddy." The truth was, Daniel usually prepared for everything. He was the kind of father who packed extra snacks, extra chargers, medicine, tissues, and backup clothes. He had left for the airport early. He had checked in online. He had booked a direct flight to avoid stress on the kids. He had even tucked Ben's little toy airplane into his backpack because the boy never traveled without it. Still, life had a cruel way of proving that preparation could not control everything. "Please," Daniel said to the agent, his voice lower now. "There has to be something." This time she looked at him, but her face stayed flat. "Sir, dozens of people are in the same situation." That sentence stung more than he expected because yes, dozens of people were stranded, but not all of them were carrying funeral clothes for their children. Not all of them were trying to make it to their mother's burial. Not all of them had spent the last 3 years holding a family together with whatever strength that was left in their hands. Lucy stepped forward, polite as always. "Excuse me, if we go to another airport, can we still make it?" The agent glanced at her, then back at the screen. "I doubt it." Daniel looked at his daughter. She was old enough now to understand disappointment, but still young enough to hope that adults could fix things if they tried hard enough. He couldn't bear the thought of watching that hope disappear. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's sit for a minute." They moved away from the gate and found 3 seats near a window. Outside, planes taxied through gray afternoon light. Ben climbed into the chair and hugged his toy plane. Lucy sat straight, hands folded, trying to be brave. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened every app he had: airlines, travel sites, rental cars, even trains. Seattle, Spokane, Portland, anything west. Everything was full, delayed, or impossible. Lucy watched him. "Dad, Aunt Carol said the funeral starts at 10, right?" "Yes, and the viewing is before that." "Yes." She nodded slowly and looked down. Daniel knew what she was thinking. Ruth had promised to teach Lucy how to make peach pie from scratch this summer. She had promised Ben they would build a birdhouse together. Children held onto promises like treasures. They didn't know yet how often life took them away. Your grandma would understand, Daniel said softly. Lucy looked back up at him. But you said we would be there. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. I know. That was the hardest part about being a parent. Sometimes the deepest pain was not your own grief. It was seeing disappointment enter your children's eyes and knowing you had no shield big enough to stop it. He stood up. Stay right here. Don't move. I'm going to ask again. He went from counter to counter. Customer service, another airline desk, a kiosk area where a tired employee tried to help him piece together a route through Denver and Boise. But even that ended with a missed connection. At one point, he almost booked a red-eye to Portland and planned to drive the rest of the way, until he realized he would be dragging two grieving children through 5 more hours on the road after landing when he returned. Ben was leaning against Lucy, sleepy and confused. Any luck? Lucy asked. Daniel knelt in front of them. He forced a smile again, but it was thinner now. Not yet. Ben's lower lip trembled. I wanted to show Grandma my drawing. Daniel put a hand on his son's cheek. I know, buddy. Ben reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded paper covered in crayons. It was a picture of himself, Lucy, Daniel, and Ruth under a huge blue sky. In one corner was a crooked little plane. For her, he said. Daniel looked at the drawing and had to turn his face away for a moment because the truth was this. No one in that terminal knew that Daniel Hayes was not just another tired father in a wrinkled sweater. No one knew he quietly owned one of the largest private aviation groups in the country: cargo services, maintenance hubs, charter fleets, and regional operations, spread across multiple states. No one knew he had spent years helping build it from the single-plane business his parents once started, and no one knew why he never used that power in public. He had promised himself after Emily died that his children would grow up around truth, not privilege, around effort, not special treatment. He traveled like everyone else, waited in line like everyone else, lived in a modest home, drove an ordinary SUV, packed school lunches himself, and kept his last name out of headlines. But sitting there, looking at Ben's drawing, Daniel began to wonder whether humility and silence were about to cost him the last goodbye he could give his mother. He looked through the airport window at the planes moving beyond the glass and whispered a sentence he never thought he would say: Mom, help me figure this out. And that was only the beginning. The next 2 hours felt longer than the previous 3 years. Daniel tried everything. He called other airlines. He checked nearby airports. He looked for flights to cities within driving distance of Seattle. He searched for rental cars large enough for the children and their bags. He even considered driving straight through from Chicago. Until Lucy quietly calculated the hours on her phone and looked at him with worried eyes. Dad, it says over 30 hours. He nodded. Yet the airport became more crowded as evening approached. Every customer service line grew longer. Every nearby seat filled with stranded travelers. Tension spread through the terminal like heat. People raised voices. Children cried. Phones rang. Coffee cups piled up beside chairs. And in the middle of all that noise, Daniel was trying to keep his own 2 children from falling apart. Ben was hungry again, so Daniel bought them sandwiches and apple juice. Lucy pretended she wasn't tired, but her shoulders had started to droop. Daniel kept checking his phone between every bite, hoping a seat would suddenly open. Nothing. At one point he finally reached a supervisor at the airline's service desk. The woman listened for less than 30 seconds before cutting him off. Sir, I understand this is emotional, but we can't create seats that don't exist. Daniel took a breath. I'm not asking you to create anything. I'm asking if there is any way to route us differently. My mother's funeral is tomorrow morning. The woman gave him the kind of tired smile people use when they've stopped really listening. Everyone's travel is important to them. For a second, Daniel just stared at her. He was too tired to argue, too hurt to speak honestly, too careful, even now, to use the one fact that could change the whole conversation. If he had said his full name in the right tone, or made one call, or asked the right executive, planes could begin moving around him like pieces on a board. But that was exactly what he had spent years refusing to do. His mother had raised him to respect people who worked hard, and to never believe his position made him more worthy than anyone else. Daniel had held tightly to that lesson. He never skipped lines, never demanded upgrades, never weaponized money or status. He wanted his children to see character before power, so he simply said, "Thank you for checking." The supervisor nodded, already turning to the next angry customer. When he got back to Lucy and Ben, his daughter looked at his face and knew no. He shook his head. Ben had taken off one shoe and curled his legs under himself in the chair. "Can we sleep here?" Daniel almost laughed, but it came out as a broken sound. "Maybe for a little while." Then his phone rang. It was his sister Carol. Daniel stepped a few feet away and answered. "Hey." Her voice was soft and tired. "Did you get on the flight?" He looked out at the darkening runway. "No." There was a pause. Then, "Oh, Danny." He leaned a shoulder against the wall. "It got cancelled. Everything else is full." Carol lowered her voice. He could hear people moving in the background at the funeral home. "The pastor asked if you still wanted to speak tomorrow." Daniel closed his eyes. Of course, he wanted to speak. He had spent the past 2 nights writing and rewriting a few simple pages about their mother, about her patience, her strength, her laugh, the way she always packed extra cookies in old butter containers, the way she loved fiercely without making a show of it. But if he couldn't get there, those pages would stay folded in his coat pocket. I don't know, he said quietly. Carol took a breath. Mom would understand. He said nothing. Then Carol added the sentence that nearly undid him, but she would have wanted the kids there if possible. Daniel looked back at Lucy, who was helping Ben fix the wing on his toy airplane, and after the call, he walked them to a quieter part of the airport near a small interfaith prayer room. The noise was lower there. The lights were softer. Ben curled up with his head in Daniel's lap. Lucy sat beside them and leaned against his shoulder. For a while, no one spoke. Then Lucy said, "Dad, why didn't Grandma move to Chicago with us?" He knew where that question came from. Grief always pulled strange questions out of children. She didn't want to leave Seattle, Daniel said. That house was home to her. That's where she and Grandpa built everything. Ben looked up. Built what? Daniel rubbed the back of his son's head. A small airplane business. 1 plane at first, then more later. Lucy blinked. Like the company you work for? He gave a faint smile. Yeah, like that. His children knew he worked in aviation. They knew he traveled sometimes and took calls about aircraft, crews, and maintenance schedules. But Daniel had never sat them down and explained the full size of what he owned. It had never felt important compared to homework, dinner, and making sure Ben remembered both shoes in the morning. Lucy was quiet for a moment. Did Grandma help make it? More than anyone, Daniel said. When Grandpa died, she kept the whole thing alive. Then when I took over, she was the one who told me not to be afraid. Lucy nodded. She was brave. She was, Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and touched the funeral pages again. His hands felt heavy. A few minutes later, Ben sat up and asked the question Daniel had been avoiding in his own mind. Will Grandma be gone before we get there? Children could be devastating without meaning to be. Daniel looked at him carefully. Grandma is already gone, but Ben frowned, trying to understand. No, I mean, will they put her in the ground before we say goodbye? And there it was, the real fear, the one none of them had said out loud. Lucy covered her mouth. Daniel looked from one child to the other. And suddenly all the strength he had been holding together began to crack. He stood up too quickly. I need 1 minute. He stepped inside the small prayer room. It was empty. A single lamp glowed in the corner. He sat down on the wooden bench, bent forward, and pressed both hands over his face. For 3 years, he had been strong when he signed Emily's hospital papers. Strong when Lucy woke screaming from nightmares. Strong when Ben asked why Mom's died. Strong when bills piled up and work calls came in during bedtime. Strong when his mother's doctor told him, "You should come now." But strength had limits, and grief did not care how responsible you were. Daniel took out his phone and opened an old voicemail from his mother. He had saved it months ago because she had laughed in it. Her voice filled the quiet room. "Danny, don't forget to breathe, and don't carry everything alone. Okay, call me when you land." His shoulders began to shake. He covered his mouth, but the tears came anyway. A moment later, the door opened softly. Lucy stepped inside, careful, gentle, older than 11 should ever have to be. She sat beside him without speaking. Then she slipped her hand into his dad. She whispered, "Grandma helped everybody." He nodded, unable to speak. Lucy squeezed his hand. "Maybe it's okay if you let somebody help you now." Daniel looked at her. Outside the room, Ben waited on the bench with his toy plane in his lap. Inside the room, Daniel stared at his phone. And for the first time that day, he stopped asking what he should avoid doing, and started asking what he needed to do to keep his promise. He scrolled to a number he had not used for personal reasons in a very long time. Then he pressed call. The call was answered on the second ring. Maya Ortiz. Daniel took a breath. "Maya, it's Daniel." His chief operating officer immediately heard something in his voice. "Daniel, what happened?" He looked at Lucy beside him and kept his tone steady. "I'm at O'Hare. My flight to Seattle was cancelled. I'm here with the kids. My mother's funeral is tomorrow morning." There was a short silence. Then Maya spoke more softly. "I'm so sorry. I know company policy," Daniel said. "And I know I've never asked for personal use. I'm not asking for favors outside procedure. I just need to know if there is any legal, safe way to get 3 passengers to Seattle tonight." Maya did not hesitate. "Give me 5 minutes." Daniel hung up and walked back to Ben. The boy looked up at him sleepily. "We might have a plan," Daniel said. Ben hugged his toy plane tighter. "A real plan, a real one." Lucy studied him. "Who did you call?" Daniel sat between them. There was no dramatic reveal in his voice, only honesty. "I called someone from work. I probably should have done it sooner." 20 minutes later, Maya called back. "We have a mid-sized jet finishing a positioning leg into a private field outside Chicago," she said. "The crew is legal for 1 more flight, and the aircraft is scheduled to be empty until tomorrow afternoon. We can have it ready for Seattle within 90 minutes. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost unbelieving. Maya continued. "A car is already on the way to move you from O'Hare." And Daniel, Yes, we also found room for 2 more passengers if you want it. One of our coordinators heard an elderly woman in your terminal is trying to reach her sister in hospice, and there's a National Guard sergeant trying to get to emergency surgery for his father. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. That sounded like something his mother would have wanted. Them, he said immediately. Absolutely. He rose and gathered the bags. Lucy stood up. Ben blinked. Where are we going? Ben asked. Daniel smiled for the first time all day, though grief still sat behind it. To another airport. The ride across the city was quiet at first. Then Lucy finally asked the question she had been holding down. What exactly do you do? Daniel looked out the window at the dark streets, then back at his children. You know, Grandpa started with 1 airplane, he said. After he died, Grandma helped keep the business alive. Years later, I grew it. More planes, more services, more people, cargo, charters, maintenance, regional flying. I stepped back from a lot of public things after Mom and after we lost your mother. Lucy listened carefully. So you own all of that? Most of it, yes. Ben's eyes widened. Like a lot of planes. Daniel laughed softly through the sadness. Yeah, buddy, a lot of planes. Ben looked down at his toy airplane and then back up. Why didn't you tell us? Daniel thought for a moment. Because I wanted you to know me as your dad first, not as a guy with money or airplanes. Lucy leaned her head against the seat. Grandma would like that. Yes, Daniel said. She would. The private terminal was simple and quiet. No crowds, no loud announcements. Just a small waiting room, a few staff members, and soft runway lights outside the window. The elderly woman was already there, clutching a handbag with both hands. The sergeant stood nearby, speaking in a low voice on his phone. When Maya's team quietly told them that Daniel was the reason they had seats, both came over to thank him. He shook his head. Don't thank me. Just get where you need to go. As they boarded, Ben stared wide-eyed at the aircraft steps. Lucy walked more slowly, still thoughtful, still carrying grief with a maturity that hurt Daniel to see. Inside the cabin, Daniel sat by the window with Ben beside him and Lucy across from them. As the plane lifted into the night, the lights of Chicago dropped away beneath them. For the first time all day, Daniel allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. Somewhere over the dark middle of the country, Ben finally fell asleep with his head against Daniel's arm. Lucy stayed awake. Dad. Yes. Were you ever going to tell us? Probably, he said. When you were older. She looked at him. I'm glad you called. He nodded. Me too. Then Lucy said something he would never forget. I think Grandma would say being humble is good, but letting people suffer just to prove a point is not. Daniel smiled sadly. That sounds exactly like her. They landed outside Seattle shortly after dawn. A company driver took them straight to the church. When Daniel stepped inside with Lucy and Ben, the service had not yet begun. Soft music was playing. Family members turned. His sister Carol saw them first. Her hand flew to her mouth, then she crossed the room in quick steps and wrapped Daniel in a hug so tight he almost lost his balance. He made it, she whispered. He held her for a moment. We made it. Lucy and Ben were taken into the arms of cousins and relatives. Ben carefully carried his folded drawing to the front and placed it near Ruth's casket. Daniel stood still. His mother's casket was simple, just as she would have wanted. White roses lay across the top. For a long moment, he could not move. Then he walked forward alone, rested one hand gently on the polished wood, and bowed his head. I'm here, Mom, he whispered. I kept my promise. At the service, Daniel gave the eulogy. He did not speak about business or success. He did not speak about titles or planes or wealth. He spoke about Ruth. About a woman who could make a small kitchen feel safe. About a mother who taught her son that tenderness was not weakness. About a grandmother who remembered every birthday, every school event, every fear a child tried to hide. About the season after Emily's death, when Daniel thought he might collapse under the weight of grief and responsibility. And Ruth quietly stood beside him until standing became possible again. She never asked for praise, he said, his voice rough but steady. She only asked one thing, that we show up for the people we love. Not only when life is easy, especially when it's hard. Lucy cried quietly in the front pew. Ben held her hand. After the burial, the family gathered at Ruth's house, the same house where Daniel had grown up, the same kitchen where his mother once packed school lunches and later helped pack his children's lunches too. That afternoon, after the relatives had thinned out and the children were upstairs with cousins, Carol sat across from Daniel at the old dining table. You know, she said, Mom would have loved the irony. Daniel smiled faintly. What irony, that her son, who owns half the sky, still tried to travel like an ordinary tired father. He looked down at his coffee. Carol reached over and touched his hand. Maybe that's why she was so proud of you. A week later, back in Chicago, Daniel received 2 messages. One was from an elderly woman who had reached her sister in time. The other was from the sergeant whose father had survived surgery. Daniel read both in silence. Then he made one more decision. He did not call the airline to complain about being mistreated. He did not demand someone be fired. He did not use influence to humiliate anyone. Instead, he wrote a letter. In it, he explained what it felt like to be a grieving parent with children beside him. He thanked the few employees who had at least tried to listen. And he wrote one line that stayed with the station manager long after. People should not have to be important for their pain to be treated with compassion. Months later, his company launched a small emergency travel support program for employees and families facing funerals, hospice visits, and urgent medical situations. Daniel named it after his mother, the Ruth Hayes Family Passage Fund, because in the end, that was who she had been, a person who helped others get where they needed to go. And maybe that was the real legacy worth protecting.